Oh, hello. Oh, just a second. My beer reel's gone off. You can be part of it. There we go. And smile. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Opportune moment to draw in a little bit about technology. I'm going to link this in a minute to something a bit more broader than that. Okay, but I want to pose you this question now. We've just done that little skit. How much do you reckon a 3-minute phone call from London to New York would cost you $9.30? Okay, if you can imagine today, that would barely cost you like 5 cents. So from London to New York, only, what's that now, like sort of 90 years ago, how much would that cost you? Hopefully, you'd be surprised. $245. So just in 90 years, we've gone from $245 to something which is literally instantaneous and will cost you a couple of cents. Even in a shorter span than that. My background, some of you will pick up from my accent, is that I came from the UK, okay? And when I migrated out to Australia, I used to do the weekly phone call to my parents. And it'll be a case of a landline phone call to them where you could literally hear the delay. You would pick up the phone, and it was one of those long ones where you had to dial it all the way up. Pick up the phone. Hi, how you going? Not too bad, how are you? There would be a delay of seconds while you're waiting for this connection to occur. During that period of time, in the next 10 years, it suddenly became a bit more of a regular phone call line behind that, and you can actually talk to that regularly. And then the satellites came more prevalent, and that made it better. Now I can literally pick up my mobile phone from here and call them via FaceTime, WhatsApp, whatever it may be, for nothing, directly from here via the satellites, up and over. But if you think that change has occurred in 90 years, think what the impact would be on businesses. If you are ordering supplies from America, if you're having your products made overseas, and you need to spend $245 just to make that order, well, it's too expensive to do that. So you wouldn't be doing that. You'd be doing telegrams, or you'd be doing a postal service. It would delay the whole process. So this transition, these changes that are occurring, I know you take this for granted because it's just part of what happens in our life. But that transition is really big, and businesses need to respond in the same way. Otherwise, they get left behind. So this whole topic is about business change. Let's get into it. So taking it from the study design and the dot points, this whole lesson is going to be about business change. Okay, and we're going to have 2 key approaches we're going to look at in more detail. Proactive, getting in first, and reactive, responding to approaches to change. So that's what we're going to cover in this lesson. So first of all, let's just think about it like business change. Well, common language, that just makes sense to all of us. If you have to change, you have to adapt, respond. Now, importantly at this point here, we want to make sure if we ever have to define this in an exam or a SAC, we want to use those other words to describe it. Okay, it's this scenario we talked about before about an apple being more than just an apple. An apple is an apple. That doesn't mean anything to people from another country or another alien species or something like that. Okay, we need different words. So an apple is a spherical fruit which is either red or green and a crunchy texture. In the same way, when we talk about change and business change, we want to use other words. So we want to talk about transitioning. Individual employees, working teams, functions, or the whole business to a new state of operation. So we want to talk about change in different things. So we just want to use different words to express what we all understand by the word business change. Now, we need to understand also that businesses are constantly evolving and adapting, that change is an ever-present focus of their lives, and they need to respond to that. So it could be small or large. Like we could have examples like here where we're just going to change products to better suit customer needs. They're not happy with the existing type of car, and they want some new features in that. So we could change the car. We could equally be moving production overseas to save costs and to maybe take advantage of cheaper labour rates to reduce the product price that we're going to sell it for. Maybe we get a new manager in our business and they've got their own ways of doing things. They might have a different management style, they have different objectives, and they want to have their first sort of footprint on the business and make something change and occur. That could change. We might even bring in new technology into the production line to make things more efficiently and effectively. So automated production lines. So lots of these adaptations, changes are occurring in business. For yourself, Do you still go to the local stores to buy stuff? Do you still go to bricks and mortar stores to buy things? Or are you much more happy being an online retailer and buy things from eBay and Amazon at a click of a button and it gets delivered to your door by Australia Post? Another example for myself. Some of these pictures won't even be resonant for yourself. But VHS cassettes used to be how we would watch movies, replaced by DVDs, etc. But you would literally go down to the store to get your VHS cassette from stores like Blockbuster, and you'd rent that for the weekend to watch your favourite movie. Well, those stores are nearly always being overrun now. So those stores have now been replaced primarily by services like Netflix, where you can stream that straight to my computer at home just at a click of a button. And by paying a subscription fee, I can get that delivered to my door, straight to my service. So lots of these changes are occurring for yourselves. If you've got a night out, okay, and in the old days you'd have got a taxi and be paying the higher fees for that, you've probably got Uber accounts where you can just click on that and look up to see who's in the neighbourhood who's going to take you home. If you're going out for a weekend away, in the old days you've got hotels. You can still do that, but maybe more attracted by the idea of an Airbnb service at a cheaper price, and maybe you like the idea of somebody's personal home in a different location rather than essential hotels. So change is occurring. And so this idea of altering behaviours, policies, practices are all part of what we mean by business change. So let's look at a couple of examples. First of all, let's take my local neighbourhood coffee. I had one this morning and I wandered in there to have my regular shot of caffeine, which gets me through the day. Okay, so how has change occurred in my local cafe? Well, the first one was obviously in response to COVID-19. So in the last couple of years, we had the restrictions that came in from the Victorian government, which would have affected that business and how it operated. They would have had to get personal protective equipment for all of their staff, whether it be masks, sanitizers in their offices, and gloves for their hands. Okay. At a point of time, there was social distancing laws where you had to have 4 meters between the tables. So they would have had to set up their table locations in different spaces and move that apart. That's a change in the business. For a period of time also, there was takeaway only, where you could literally just tap and go. There was no sit-down options. So that would have changed the business. So COVID itself would have affected that business in the cafe. Technology's obviously changed as well. We now often have websites with online booking options, so you can be placing your order before you even get there. You can be having a Facebook or Instagram page to promote the business. Rather than local flyers or an ad in the newspaper, we can now be using those services. And obviously at the counter, we could be using contactless payment. I don't know, I can remember the last time I really used cash for buying a coffee. It's all tap and go. So whether it be PayPass, PayWave, the Square devices, whatever it may be, to get that contactless payment. It could also be a cafe merges up on the side of the road. A new competitor comes in. How are you going to respond to stay in the business? You need to evolve. You need to change. Maybe you reduce your prices to try and attract customers to your cheaper product. Or maybe you create something special about your product, the additional bakery items that you have on our offer, or maybe you have a loyalty scheme and you change the business to respond in that way. So we can see even at the smaller level here of a sole trader for a cafe, they need to change. On a much bigger level, Qantas is an example of a business that's gone through enormous change over this last period of time. Just think what happened when in 19th of March 2020, this media release came out for the Prime Minister of Australia's office. Effectively, it said, Australia is closing its borders to all non-citizens and non-residents. The entry ban takes effect from Friday the 20th of March 2020. Now, if you can imagine, for not only an international but a domestic airline which relies heavily on international tourists coming in to be offering them the flights and the revenue, suddenly that's going to stop. That's obviously going to have huge implications for a company like Qantas. What are they going to do if the revenue isn't going to keep coming in? If those people aren't going to be buying tickets, do we still have a business? And Alan Joyce instantly had to change the business to respond just to allow it to survive. So he announced a 3-year recovery plan where he was trying to aim to save $15 billion in costs. The idea being if we haven't got revenue, got to survive, maybe we've got to reduce their expenses substantially to allow us to still be in operation. So they aim to cut costs with a huge, unfortunate rundown of the workforce, 9,000 redundancies to save this amount of money, stand downs and outsourcing of roles like baggage handlers. If we don't need the planes because there's no service needing to be operated anymore, what do we do with the planes? Well, they sent 12 Airbuses to the Mojave Desert in America, where it's a really arid, dry environment to prevent them rusting under the weather conditions and effectively put them in hibernation and storage. They put another 100 aircraft in storage in hangars and on runways for ongoing maintenance. Another part of the air fleet, the 747 older, they retired them early to, again, save costs, just to allow the business to survive. And during the COVID, for the limited service they were still doing, well, again, they've got to do the PPE equipment and training. So here's an example of a business that had to have a massive change in response to the COVID epidemic that existed at that time. We all experience change on a daily basis, whether it be changing classes, year levels, friendship groups, and ultimately, at the end of this year, for you, considering what is going to life be after school. Are you thinking of going to university? Are you thinking of going to TAFE, getting an apprenticeship, getting straight into the workforce, having a gap year? All of that's going to change for you. Now, clearly, that could be exciting for some of you. You can wait to do that. Some of you may be a little bit nervous and there's a bit of anxiety. What will the future be like? Well, the same is true for companies. Their workforce are going to have to go through that transition whenever we bring them a change. We might be changing the policies, the procedures, how we operate the business. All sorts of reasons why you might change. Is it for growth, innovation, redundancy, outsourcing, relocation, diversification, competition? All of these signal change. And the trick is trying to get ahead of the game and be proactive rather than waiting for these changes to hit you and just trying to respond to the punches by being reactive. So we want to try and get ahead and create positive opportunities for maximizing the opportunities that exist for us in that exciting area where we experience business change. So here we're going to look at the first approach to change, which is being proactive. So proactive is getting in first, okay? So this is about acting in advance to avoid future problems and taking that opportunity to gain a competitive advantage. Get in there first in a nice, calm, full, proactive way. We're going to get in first and make the opportunity work for us. So what's an example of that? Well, the first one could be looking for a gap in the market. Where isn't there some competition? Where isn't there some products and services that best meet the customer needs? A good example of occurred during the COVID era with the home delivery food options. The idea being that many people couldn't go to the supermarkets. So if you had a supermarket operating a home delivery option, and they were the first ones to do that, then by setting up and getting a subscription for that service, you created a whole new opportunity. And now Coles and Woolworths are trying to follow on with that and trying to get into those markets. So the idea being home delivery food options, if you can get in first, again, you're going to be proactive and seize an opportunity. Also trying to recognize opportunities in the market for new business trends. So electric cars, an example being Tesla, getting into a new market first with their electric car operation and then trying to build that market and take advantage of that opportunity. And now other players are trying to respond to that. It could also be investing in new technology, changing to automated production lines or robotics and getting in first before other competitors seize that opportunity as well. So proactive, getting in first, seizing an opportunity. So it's trying to avoid future problems and get in first to seize that competitive advantage. Now we're going to draw on this later. You're going to see this later on what's called Porter's generic strategies. Okay, so we're going to see that later on about being proactive and getting in first. Okay, so a proactive approach to change, seizing the opportunity, get in first. The second approach to change, obviously, is the counter to proactive. It's reactive, responding to things and having to respond to survive effectively. So a reactive approach to change occurs when a business undertakes change in response to a situation or crisis. Something happens and now you've got to do something about it. So, for example, if a business experienced a major decline in its profits, say they fall by 50%, well, you have to respond or you're going to go out of business. Okay? If a competitor comes in, introduces a new product that is starting to seize a large percentage of your market share, then you need to respond. A good example of this was Audi. that emerged almost out of nowhere and then seized about 12-15% of the market for supermarkets. And now those other companies like the Coles and Woolworths need to respond to that as a competitor. Or if there's a controversial problem, something happens, is headlined in the media about your business and it's putting your business down, you need to respond. So reactive is responding to things that occur to allow you to still survive. And then importantly, you've got to respond quickly, okay, to remain competitive and viable. Because if that runs for too long, you're going to be out of business. So a reactive approach is when a business undertakes change in response to either a situation or a crisis, something you need to respond to. So let's put all of that together. So let's compare proactive and reactive approaches to change. So what's similar and different between the two? Okay, when we have the word compare, we're looking at similarities and differences. So what do they both have in common? Well, both of them are going to be used by a manager to implement change. Okay, proactive, get in first, you're going to change. Reactive, you're also going to ultimately change the business. So a manager is going to look at both of them and respond to it. Both of them also require the support of the manager to use their skills to implement and plan and get through that process. Okay, so both of them are going to still have a manager having a key role in planning, organizing, and implementing that change. The differences are that proactive clearly happens first. We're taking advantage of a new opportunity. Okay, whereas the reactive is responding to either situation or crisis as a force into change. And if you think about it, that then leads into the next one, that if you're being proactive, you are seeing things in advance, so you can be much more planned, you're going to be much more controlled, and you're going to think through all the steps you're going to take, and hopefully be a much more calmer, more organized approach to change. Whereas reactive, something's happened and you've got to respond really quickly. So it's going to be spontaneous, urgent, and more pressured. So there's a difference again in the approach there. But here we have proactive, getting in first, reactive, responding. So let's have a quick look at a worked example of a question that could occur in maybe a SAC or the end of year exam. And the question here is distinguish between proactive and reactive approaches to change. So when we get that word distinguish, we're looking at what is different between proactive and reactive. So if we think of the 2 marks that are available, we're going to describe them and then explain how one of the approaches differs from the other one. So if we break this down, a proactive approach to change is when a business acts in advance to avoid future problems or takes an opportunity to gain a competitive advantage. Okay. Whereas, okay, here's our difference. A reactive approach is when a business undertakes change in response to a situation or crisis. So we've clearly shared what's different between the two, and therefore we'll get the 4 marks available. So in summary, okay, so change, business change is where we're transitioning, we're adapting, we're evolving, okay? We're changing our working teams, functions, policies, procedures, maybe the whole business, okay? We can either be proactive and taking a situation in advance to avoid future problems, or we can be reactive, responding to a situational crisis and having to adapt the business to respond to it. So we have our keywords here about business change. What's coming up in our next lesson is key performance indicators and how they affect the business and cause change. Look forward to seeing you then.